And in an interesting turn of events, Public Enterprises Minister Lynne Brown today indicated that she'd be keen for South African Airways to explore the idea of joining forces with a strategic partner. This comes on the back of Finance Minister Nhlanhla also indicating the possibility of private companies taking an equity stake in distressed state-owned enterprises. Since the dispensation post-Apartheid, privatisation of public assets has been a no-go area, but economic realities appear to be changing that. But there are some who continue to campaign against privatisation in principle. I'm joined by Trevor Ngwane. He's an anti-privatisation activist. Thank you very much for joining us, Trevor.
Thank you. All
right. Now, South African Airways is in dire straits. Government for years has been bailing it out year in, year out. What's wrong with having a private entity that's got some know-how working as a partner with government to help it fly?
Well, some of the people who have been brought in to sort out South African Airways exactly come from the private sector, and they bring private sector values, the idea that, top management must get, big salaries, big packs, also a top-down style of management, excluding workers, anti-union practices. So those are the kind of problems which we face, with that kind of thinking from the private sector. I think what we need is a democratic control of our economy and of our state-owned enterprises. So we need more involvement of workers, of trade unions, and of the general public in mapping out a way forward, which will benefit everyone and not just the few.
I think that model that you're expressing has been successful in other economies where workers are involved in the process. But in South Africa, we have the problem of a lack of skills. And obviously, because you get the private sector in, or people who come from the private sector, you have to pay for their skills. So how do we bridge that gap, given the fact that the reality is that the vast majority of South Africans don't have the qualifications to run big corporations?
I don't think that people lack skills. They just lack the correct orientation, which is a social orientation as opposed to a pro-profit orientation. So I think what has happened in South Africa, our revolution has lost its way. Our political leaders, government leaders, are now dancing to the music of the big bourgeoisie, the big bosses, and have forgotten where they come from, the Freedom Charter and all the socialist ideals which they espoused during the struggle.
Now, if we adopt the model that you're proposing, we know that government has obviously failed in some of these areas. State-owned enterprises have failed in many areas. What is the solution? What needs to happen practicably to ensure that these entities run sustainably and can fund themselves without any private sector assistance?
What we need is a vision where we meet people's needs. We should move away from trickle-down economics, the idea that we have to grow the cake, this obsession with economic growth. The problem is not that there's a shortage of wealth or resources. It's how the resources are used and how the wealth is redistributed, whether equitably or not. Now, in 2008, we had an economic global meltdown. Those ideas of neoliberalism, deregulation, labor flexibility, financial, removing exchange controls were shown to be problematic. But now we see a kind of secret, covert, subtle, creeping revival of that approach. And I think that I'm not surprised that even before our new minister was introduced to us as the public, he first went to a meeting of the World Bank and the IMF, where he was given his mandate, and he came back and told us what his big bosses are telling him to do.
Sorry, when you say the minister, you're talking about the finance minister?
About Mr. Nhlanhla. Yeah. I mean, his first port of call before he was formally introduced to us, was to attend the meeting of the World Bank and the IMF in Washington. And it was there that he stated that, you know, there won't be any great wage increases for the public sector. Now, my question is, where is he getting his mandate? So I think that our government must liberate itself from the ties of the Washington consensus, given the history, you know, of the 2008 economic crash, which show that these ideas are not viable for the world.
Trevor, I understand where you're coming from, but what I understand from the economists that I've spoken to is that if workers were to get a 15% increase, that would be something like plus 9% on inflation, a real increase of 9%. That would have huge implications for the fiscus because it means that we go into greater debt and our budget deficit would widen. And then those ratings agencies who presumably are in line with the Washington consensus would then downgrade the economy, which means that when we need to borrow money, which we need to because we're a developing economy, we're going to have to pay so much more interest on the money that we borrow. And that means that's going to curtail our ability to develop. So what do we do? Because we are not in an island, we live in a global village.
Yes, that is what we have to recognize, that the village we live in is dominated by capital, and that capital is not there to benefit any country, in fact, in particular. It is there to benefit the rich elite, who now we call the top 1%. A French economist, Thomas Piketty, wrote a fascinating book which is being read everywhere in the world, showing that there is a great increase in inequality. The top 1% of the population is actually taking all the wealth. Is that how we want to continue? So those credit rating agencies are part of that problem, are part of that system. We have to liberate ourselves. We have to find our own way. We have to encourage African countries. We have to encourage Southern African countries. We have to encourage Latin American countries to join us in a struggle against a system which actually makes the rich richer, the poor poorer. The children are dying. There are many statistics which show this. For example, I'll choose one. At the moment in South Africa, 25% of the children are actually, stunted in their growth. This means that they are smaller in body and smaller in their brains. That means that we are actually committing a crime against 25% of our children. This cannot go on.
Trevor, it's a heavy topic. That's where we're going to have to leave it, though. Thank you for your time. That was Trevor Ngwane. He's an anti-privatisation activist.